How is a sword made out of lava ever a good idea? What? God! Hey guys, and welcome back to another cosplay walkthrough. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Lorian from Dark Souls 3. I'm going to step through the armor, detailing, straps, painting techniques, different materials and stuff there first, and then I'm going to step into talking about the prop for the giant flaming lava greatsword. So beginning with the armor, it's all pretty much basically EVA, except for the knee pads, which are metal, so that I can kneel down and not destroy that piece, and the finger guards, which are all nice, tough Warbler. The reason for that is I've had foam finger pieces before, and they crinkle up and get damaged pretty easily, but Warbler helps avoid that on the actual finger pieces themselves. The palms are EVA, and so having that mix is really nice on the glove. Specifically for the type of EVA, I had this orange half-inch thick mat, which I do not know the source for because it was obtained by a friend, but it is pretty similar to this half-inch EVA, which you may have seen on Amazon and around. I'll include a link to that as well. It cuts and forms, shapes down pretty much the same as the orange stuff. So if you've seen progress photos where it looked like a Cheeto, it's because I am using the orange foam, but it's just the same as the other stuff. Process for the armor was a lot of speed templating with butcher paper and masking tape on my body form. Definitely recommend having a duct tape dummy or something else form of yourself that you can work off of. It saves a ton of time. But as far as the templating goes, it's a lot of, like for my helmet, just tossing on a piece of paper, getting the shapes crinkled down relatively right, and then taking masking tape across that form and getting it how I like it, and then just cutting it apart to where it folds flat in that shape, and then transferring that shape to EVA. Working that way is much quicker because you can just churn out the shapes and stuff that you need according to scale to yourself, but you won't have the electronic blueprint if you want to share your blueprints with others, make the armor again, something like that. So that's something that I do a lot for armor for myself that I need to get created. For something like props, which you may want a little bit more exact precision, or you maybe want to make it again or share your plans with friends, Illustrator would be a better option, or Inkscape, to make the blueprint electronically and then scale it up from there. That's what I did for the sword. So as far as strapping on this went, there are tons of options you can use, of course. Some of the most common are just fabric thread that you can put buckles on and stuff, like it's a futuristic space armor. For this, because it's a classical medieval sort of armor, the strapping was actually shown very clearly in the references. There were leather straps with gold studs that kept them on and that they stamped onto. So just an example of sort of how that straps on realistically. This is the boot piece, and you can strap underneath for that one here, and then behind the boot for there, which are two very good strap points in general. So if your references are realistic, it's nice to be able to work off realistic forms like that. As far as the straps themselves, they were actual leather, so using leather tools like a leather hole punch, actual leather studs, little top points here, along with actual buckles that were later spray painted gold is the way to go. For the specific rivet details, sort of to look like the plates of armor are riveted together, I went with the tried and true googly eyes. This comes in multiple different sizes, and you can toss them on your armor as you will to get the riveted look in between the different plates. So with the bracer as an example, this is just a single piece of EVA, another piece on top, and then another piece back to form, and the different rivet points of contact to make it look like the plates are riveted together. That can be seen pretty clearly on the hand pieces themselves to get that sort of armored gauntlet look. Another detailing thing on this build, there are these spiral sort of guards on the shoulder pieces on here. So the way that was accomplished was just cutting strips of craft foam and then twirling it such that it made this kind of spun shape, and then at each point tossing down some super glue and then just running it all the way to the edge and then getting on there now. So I went back over with a little bit more super glue on all the seams, and it's very strong on there. As far as all of these cuts on the armor to make it get a little battle damage on there, that was done just with a hot knife there. So you heat this up and then do a quick slice where you want your detailing, sort of cutting it along the armor as if it would have actually been struck with sword damage. Then hit it with your heat gun afterwards, and those will open right up and come out looking nice. So now we have all of our base construction done, our detailing put in, things in mind for our strapping. So the next thing is to seal it. You can use tons of different things. In the future, I'm going to be aiming more towards using latex, but on this, I was crunched for time, so I used tried and true Plasti Dip. For my base coat, I chose to use a metallic gold. So this was actually very shiny gold when it first came out. That was because I wanted to dull up that gold with airbrush tones afterwards. So this is a gold paint primer together, and then after I came back through with darker tones to kind of bring down that shiny gold. It can shine through in some areas, and when the light hits it, it looks more golden, but it kind of gives it that charred gold, used to be gold armor effect. So as far as how to actually paint everything without having to paint one side and flip it over, paint the other side, I've had good luck with using these clamps of varying sizes and then running baling wire through it. If you have places in your paint area where you can string up a baling wire, this will work perfectly, or you can get some PVC pipe and make yourself a little box, and then you can create a painting rack out of that with these clamps that hold things down. For the smaller pieces, that of course won't make sense, so instead you can use something like this, just out of foam, making some paint stands. These held my finger pieces here. You can see that going on there, my palm pieces. These held all of my finger pieces, and then these are what I stuck my thumb endpoints on, so that I didn't have to turn them around and spin them and get one side at first and then get the other side and stuff and worry about things peeling off on my paint surfaces. So whenever you can do that, where you can have some kind of holder or something so that you can paint 99% of it at once, definitely try to go that route. It may make sense for some sort of crown shape or like a half helmet where you have hair coming down, where the top of your head isn't exposed, to where instead of wearing a wig, which adds that extra size and can make your head kind of hurt after a while, you can take the equivalent of essentially wefts, or strip them off of your wig and then hot glue them on the inside like this. And then you get a shape that looks like it's the hair flowing out naturally, but it's actually just part of the helmet, and normally the widest part of the helmet that doesn't actually hit your head at all anyway. It's coming away from your head. Drilled a few small holes in the front part here so that I can have kind of pinhole vision. You can kind of see a little bit through here, and then I took black fabric, just black near translucent fabric, and then put that in here to fully hide my eyes. You can kind of see the fabric in there now, those squares, and so the end result is just like that, where this is actually where my eyes are, but you can't really make them out. So now stepping away from the armor stuff a little bit to talk about the prop that I made for this. This is all XPS Foam and Epsilon. So looking at that, this is the XPS Foam. I've talked about this before in other videos, this pink foam here. And Epsilon is a 2-part resin that doesn't eat through that, which is rare to find, that's put out by Smooth On. So the reason I went this route is because there's no great way to hide wiring and having like a detachable battery and stuff. So I wanted something that would show the light through, it's on the internals, on both sides and all the way through the blade, which is kind of a tough order. It's pretty easy to make like a tip of a blade glow and then hide all of that wiring and battery and stuff on the inside and have a lot of strength. There are plenty of materials like acrylic and stuff like that you can accomplish that with. So using the XPS foam, I first took 2 pieces of 2-inch thick, this is 1-inch thick, together, and in the general size and shape of this sword, put it together temporarily with Super 77, spraying one side and then sealing it. And then I went to work cutting out the rough shape of the sword, all these edges, and then I went through and added all of these detail marks. I'd made a heat map where I knew that this area needed to be a little deeper because I wanted it to shine the red through more. So I went through and, according to the little heat map blueprint that I made, dremeled down all of these details, went back over with some sandpaper to hand carve it out according to how it should look, sort of melted up the handle and stuff with a grinding Dremel bit. And then after I had the rough form, it was time to split those two pieces of XPS foam apart. So after I split them apart, I ended up having essentially two shells ready to have the epsilon applied. So I mixed up the epsilon and put on a few coats of the epsilon because I wanted it to be very secure despite not being one whole piece. So I was a little apprehensive of breaking and stuff there, obviously. So lots of layers of epsilon on here to get at that level of durability that I wanted. And then after I was done with that, I flipped them over and started working on the internals. So the first part of this was to remove XPS foam up to the epsilon in the areas I wanted the hottest to show that LED through the most, and then to leave a little bit of foam in the areas I didn't want a ton of LED coming through. Basically to use that heat map that I had made before to come through and remove foam so that the light on the inside can get through. So the lighting that I used on this were same ones that I used on previous projects. They are Super Night LED strips, waterproof LED strips. This is just red as opposed to the RGBW that I used on Genos, so that I could change the colors and stuff there. This is just straight red, and I lined it up through the handle on both sides, and then up through the blade on one, sort of up against the edge of the blade so that the light would reflect into that hollow I'd created. So the reason that I ran the LED strips up the handle here is because of the shape of the handle holding the steel dowel on both sides. There's a steel dowel running on both sides for security. The nature of that into the handle, if I had just had the LED on one side of the handle, it would only kind of glow through on one side, and I wanted both sides of the handle to be emblazed. So I ran LEDs up both sides of the handle and then up the blade on the other, and then had this little connector here to connect the two sides of the blade. So when I merge them together with all of these magnets that I've put along all the sides to reduce the size of the seam, when I put them together with this little plug, it lights up the handle on the opposite side, as well as this that lights up underneath the battery, as well as the main core area that has it running all the way up the blade. To get the pulsing effect that I have on this, to sort of replicate that lava surge and flow, I'm using two RF LED controllers that I will include links to that have an RF controller, wireless controller that comes with it. And these are super handy if you're using these types of strips because it comes preloaded with a lot of different modes and speed adjustments. So on this, I just kind of have like a pulsing up and down effect, and then I played with the speed until I got it to where I liked the overall look, to where it gives that kind of slow ebb of lava. I am using an XT power supply. I really like these little battery packs. They're super handy to use. As far as how it works in this build, because I needed to have room for the battery, which was a challenge in a shape like this, I originally wanted it to be in between the steel rods that run through this sword, just kind of in between like this, setting on one side of the steel blade, but it was too thick to do that, and so I actually had to cut the steel on this side in both edges, put in the battery permanently, and then seal it to the steel rod with epsilon. So the battery is now part of the stability for this sword, just because there was no other place to really hide it. As far as charging and stuff goes, it's now a permanent part of the sword. I just need to split it apart or pull open this one edge and put in my charger from there. But this is permanently part of the sword now. So some caveats that you may want to consider, if you do a fully hollow prop like this, utilizing Epsilon so that LED can come through the entire way. Stability and durability are going to be the main things that you're fighting against. So to get a little more stability on this, and to work well with my magnet seal, I used a lot of Epsilon to come over the lip here to make a more full seam. You also need to be careful with that though, because if there are edges that come up much higher, then the low points will obviously let the light bleed through and it'll kind of ruin the seam that you're trying to make a really nice, even flush one. But having the Epsilon come from the outside and then wrap inside gives you more security, as well as using Epsilon to actually bond the steel rod running through to your XPS Foam core. So doing that, it really becomes one solid piece with much more stability. So the Epsilon actually is part of your core stability network here. You can see a lot of Epsilon up at this weak point here on the handle, a lot of Epsilon in this weak point here. So that'll just give your prop a lot more strength to last, relying on the Epsilon there. Otherwise, if it's hollow and there's just a thin layer of Epsilon on the outside and the steel rod is, or whatever dowel or whatever you're using for stability, isn't securely in there super well, you'll find a lot of flex on the shell, the eggshell, the Epsilon, and then you'll run into cracking. So the more Epsilon that you put on the inside to combat that, the better. So as you can see, the seam that's, now that we have it back together, the seam is there and visible, which is going to be something that you're going to be fighting against on a build like this. You can get it more flush, but it's going to take a lot of sanding in even areas to get it all level and perfect. If I were to change one thing on this build, it would have been to have that in mind from the very start. Having the two sides of XPS, or the two pieces of XPS that could split at a single seam, helped with that. But once you have it apart and you're hollowing it, it's easy to mess with that perfect evenness that seam gives you, and then you end up starting to put on more Epsilon to build up to make up for it, taking away Epsilon. So just something to keep in mind the entire time if you're trying to have a build where you pull it apart, hollow it, and then make it to where it can split in half and then come back together with magnets. Other than that, it was pretty straightforward as far as shaping XPS foam down. The techniques used there with, Dremel a little bit, sandpaper otherwise. The paint was all ghost tint in the areas that I wanted the light to show through. So I started with yellow tones and then put down some orange and some red to sort of make it look lava-like without the light in general. And then when the light turns on, it sort of comes through even more. And then for the black areas, I used non-ghost tint, just solid black and brown and some earthy tones that I merged together to sort of have that act as a blocker from the light. But the ghost tints are a thinner type of paint, so they don't block the light nearly as much. As always, guys, if you have any questions at all, feel free to shoot me a message over on my Facebook page. I will help out on whatever project and whatever way that I can. If you have any more questions on this specifically, things that I forgot to go over, which happens a lot, feel free to ask me about those as well. But other than that, this has been the cosplay walkthrough for Lorian from Dark Souls 3, and hopefully it was helpful. Thanks.